Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and fellow voices of reason. The doctor is in. It is I, Alejandro Cortez, Deputy of Common Sense, and welcome one, welcome all, to my video lecture on religion. Today we shall observe the Word of God, and we shall beg his forgiveness from our transgressions against his ultimization, and we shall pray for deliverance from his terrible tempestuosity, or something like that. So, why don't we go ahead and go balls deep into religion? Wow, that's a sentence I never thought I'd say. I think I just heard every Catholic priest on earth snap to attention, if you know what I mean. I'm guessing they're all headed to speak with the Pope at this very moment. Like, oh my gosh, Your Holiness, I sense a total disturbance in the Force. Yes, I have sensed it too, Brother Mario. It is good of you to be so vigilant. It appears that someone out there thinks we like dicks. Well, I don't like dicks, Your Holiness. Dicks are gross. They're big and veiny and thick, and some of them have these absolutely delicious-looking purple heads. Snap out of it, Brother Mario. This appears quite serious. I'll call a meeting of the super best friends. They'll know how to handle this. Of course, Your Holiness. I'll just, go home, and I won't think about dicks anymore. I'll just work out with the godly bros. We'll do squat thrusts, and we'll wrestle on the floor. We'll get all sweaty, and we'll have to spray each other with my hose. And then we'll get naked, cover ourselves in oil, and totally work on our tans. Ooh, Jesus Christ. I think I'll go check and see if I have ingredients for a ton of Cosmos, because we are so gonna get white girl wasted. For the unenlightened, that was a vigilant Christian Mario joke. Yeah, I know, picking on Mario is the lowest of low-hanging fruit. I tried to resist, and I failed, and I'm sorry for that. But let's leave Mario to his gay orgies, and move on to something, I don't know, actually interesting. Let's explore religion. Welcome to the Endless Waltz. May I have this dance? Okay, to start with, why don't we deal with the absence of even the most basic logic when it comes to religion, and the moral bankruptcy of God and his followers? The idea of God is a truly ridiculous concept. Only a madman would believe that snakes and donkeys talk, that the universe came into being in 7 days, that humans can rise from the grave, that books created in the Bronze Age have any bearing on modern society, and other nonsensical rubbish. In addition, only a truly immoral person would base their morality on a book that supports slavery. Violence against unbelievers, homosexuals and blasphemers, rape, planetary genocide, pedophilia, incest, and other equally repugnant teachings. Nonetheless, religion remains a dominant force in human society, and it has from the dawn of civilization. As of 2010, 84% of the world belongs to a religion of some kind, and whether science and history support the claims of those religions is an idea that is of little concern to believers. Religion is a virus of the mind. It devours all thoughts that oppose its teachings. The religious mind has built-in defenses against ideas that would make the religious individual question his or her faith. One of these is sin. Anything that opposes God is a sin. So it follows that unbelief is the greatest sin of all. If you do not believe, you are spurning God's gift of everlasting life. You are ignoring that the supposed creator of everything even exists. To the religious, this is the height of arrogance and disrespect. And it is also why religious people try so hard to convert others to their faith. The idea of an unbeliever is an affront to all that is just and right in the universe. That is the thought that goes on in their minds. It enrages them to see people who reject the snake oil they sell. Their ire reaches its peak when people actively criticize their faith. For when criticism is levied against them, the possibility arises that some among the congregation might see the truth behind the illusion of religious belief, and thereby decide to abandon the faith. Of course, that simply cannot be allowed. So the religious have created safeguards to prevent those within the faith from leaving. The primary safeguard is indoctrination. And of course, indoctrination works best when administered to the naive and ignorant. So, they go for children. Not just their children, but ours and yours. Every child is a potential member of the flock. That is how they think. Leaders in the faith target children with their sermons, with their chick traps, with their media. But their best weapon of indoctrination is the false promise of a better life. All of these strategies are designed to lure children into believing that religion is the answer to all of their problems. The religious peddle baseless claims and unscientific nonsense in a very similar fashion to the snake oil salesmen of the early 20th century. All of this is for the sole purpose of converting others to the faith, and their most valuable converts are children. And yet, somehow, it is atheists like myself who are abusing children by teaching them evolution, sex education, critical thinking, and basic human decency. Oh, and let's not forget abortion. The religious throw giant tantrums about killing babies, but they don't care about the children who are starving or in broken homes. That's not their problem. The fact is, the religious are only concerned about children when they are either unborn or when they are being taught ungodly things. And while people such as Ben Shapiro might say that they believe in facts over feelings, when the topic moves away from socialism and onto the subject of God, facts are sent to the back of the class, and feelings take over. But for all their attempts to convert me, to persuade me, to convince me that God is real, I have yet to come across an argument for God's existence that doesn't essentially boil down to not having him there makes me feel uncomfortable. Believers say that atheists lead meaningless lives. I find that ridiculous. I cannot think of an existence more meaningless than one of unceasing obedience to someone I have never met. And in my personal opinion, this God, this almighty being, he's nothing but another imaginary monster created to scare small children into unthinking obedience. He is a boogeyman for adults. It's funny, some compare the Abrahamic God to Thanos, but in my opinion, this comparison is a false one. Such a comparison is absurd, and it couldn't be further from the stark monstrosity of the Abrahamic God. The truth is that the Mad Titan is 1,000 times the God that Yahweh will ever be. The truth is, the two are nothing alike. The difference is in their motivations, their actions, and even the very essence of their characters. Thanos wanted to save the universe, and so he eliminated half of the universal population indiscriminately, so that the rest could live in freedom, peace, happiness, and prosperity. His actions, while certainly vile, were born out of the despair he witnessed on Titan. He wasn't a god. He was a mortal being that had incredible power and used it as he thought best. He was a monster, but he was a very fallible, very illogical, and ultimately very mortal monster. He gave up the person he valued most, but the stakes were real, because he wasn't getting Gamora back unless he lost. He couldn't simply raise her from the dead 3 days later, and he never once asked anyone to worship him. Yahweh, on the other hand, will supposedly destroy all of existence one day. Everything that was, everything that is, everything that ever shall be, will all vanish. Only two places will remain. A place of paradise for those who bent the knee in servitude. And what exactly is the reward for their life of devotion? Why, an eternity of groveling at the feet of a petty despot. And what about the rest? Well, they get an eternity of suffering because they did things that God didn't like. I really can't think of a greater monster than the Abrahamic God. Thanos doesn't even come close. The vampires, werewolves, wendigos, the boogeyman, Sith Lords, the Borg, the Daleks, Pennywise the Dancing Clown. They don't hold a candle to this uber monster. Every monster mankind has ever created is dwarfed by the sheer hateful malevolence of this imaginary being. God is the greatest monster that mankind ever created. He is in fact so great that to this day some people still believe him to be real out of sheer terror of his wrath. The unspeakable horrors of Lovecraft had the excuse of being insane, so even they are but pale imitations. This so-called God supposedly knows all, is all-powerful, is everywhere at once, and he supposedly loves us. But if this is the world he chose to create, and these are his chosen followers, then I am far from impressed. I could do better with one brain cell. This God is a monster to end all monsters. I think I understand why the name Godzilla was chosen for the English version of Gojira. A true king of the monsters indeed. Should the existence of Yahweh ever be proven, then may someone have mercy on us all. God certainly won't. I go to bed every night thankful that I am not a sheep in a flock, but instead a lion in a pride. I feel deep sorrow for all those who suffer because of the sheep, but most of all, I am filled with pity for all those who live and die inside the flock without ever knowing the true taste of freedom. I can say with absolute certainty that there is no damnation greater than a life spent in constant fear. Trust me, I have been there. The truth is, they've been in hell all along. They don't even realize it, and some of them never will. A mental prison designed with no escape route. An impenetrable labyrinthian hypercube from which no human should be able to escape. And yet, humans do escape. That's a greater miracle than any god could possibly create. Maybe hope remains for us yet. Maybe one day, mankind will be free. And the words of Nietzsche will finally come true. On the day when childhood ends, and mankind finally grows up, God will truly and finally be dead. And he'll be dead forever. To be honest, I say good riddance to him and his book of nonsense. May the entire history of his existence, of his followers, of his dogma, every trace of him, even his name, may all of them be swept away and lost forever among the sands of time. Even that is too great a mercy for such a fathomless monster. Nevertheless, mankind will be far better off when this so-called God, his book, and his followers are nothing but dust upon the earth. That will be a day of celebration for us all. A true Independence Day. The absence of belief will free you all from shackles that you never even realized were binding you. And when the cuffs are removed from your mind, you will realize just how much they restrained your thoughts and your emotions. You are trapped within a mental prison of faith, built out of the bricks of dogma, sealed with the mortar of fear, and buried in a sea of ignorance. And the leaders of whatever faith you might belong to know one important truth that you don't. They fear this truth. Once freed, the bird is not so easily caged a second time. And so it spreads its wings and soars into a future where the possibilities are limitless. They know this, and they fear this, because that is the beginning of the end. That is when you realize that you've taken the first step into a larger world. And man said, "Let there be freedom." God is a monster, but thankfully there is no credible evidence whatsoever for his existence. If any of you disagree, I invite you to demonstrate not only that God exists, but to also prove his moral high ground. Can you demonstrate to me that God exists? Can you ask him to come down and show me that he exists? No, I don't think that you can. I think that God is a figment of the imagination of brainwashed sheep. God is a Bronze Age lie made up to scare primitive people into obeying those in power, and to prevent those primitive people from doing whatever horrible shit they do otherwise. God is nothing more than a construct created by man to inspire fear and promote order. And fear is very necessary. Fear is an evolutionary necessity. It lets us know that what we're attempting might be dangerous. That being said, fear should never stand in the way of progress. Even without the religions of the past 2,000 years, I think that man would still be a creature that fears the dark. He does not face that fear. He averts his eyes from it, and pretends that he never had any memory of his history. The problem is, 2,000 years can be both a brief time and a long time, man's fear has withered, and even time tries to wither the desire to know the truth. Is it a crime to try and learn the truth? Is it a sin to search for those things of which you fear? My purpose in this world is knowledge and the dissemination of it, and it is I who is to restore the fruits of my labors to the entire world. Fear! It is something vital to us puny creatures. The instant mankind stops fearing is the instant the species will reach a dead end, only to sink to pitiable lows, only to sit and wait apathetically for extinction. Wake up! Don't be afraid of knowledge! Humans who lose the capacity to think become creatures whose existence has no value. Think, you humans who are split into two worlds! Unless you want the gulf between humans to expand into oblivion, you must think! You must not be blinded by your fear to the point where it traps you in a perpetual paralytic state of now. Wisdom is found in balance. It is found in understanding the subtle nuances in everything around you. Your God would return us to the primitive ways of the past, and then imprison us there forever. You want a world without change. How stagnant. One could hardly call it life. A miserable existence, no different than a world of memories. You say atheism is meaningless? No, I'm afraid that isn't correct. It is your worldview that is meaningless. You desperately pursue the past, while those in power seek the present. But regardless of what anyone else thinks, what I want is tomorrow! Another question that religion is unable to answer is the origin of evil and the cause of human suffering. If any of the religious are watching this, tell me, what overall benefit did the creation of Hitler bring about? How does a man of God create such horrors? How precisely does your God answer for the deaths of 85 million people, the blood of whom are on the hands of one of his followers? What purpose do the deaths of the billions upon billions of innocent children who have died of starvation, disease, neglect, or cruelty throughout human history? How is it that abortion is an affront to God, and at the same time children are born with Down syndrome, or progeria, or any other horrible disease? What possible purpose could be served with the creation of muscular dystrophy, or Parkinson's disease, or Huntington's disease, or Marfan syndrome? Why are corrupt leaders allowed to prey upon the weak? Why are people so needlessly cruel to those weaker than them? Why is Robin Williams dead, while at the same time people who would leave a box of helpless kittens in a dumpster are still alive? Where is your God for any of this? If there is some greater purpose here, then I would like to be let in on it, please. It doesn't make any sense to me. But since when did religion make any sense? Now, some of you might argue that without God, morality cannot exist, because God is the basis of all human morality. You might argue that my horror at the world's immorality is a direct result of God. You might argue that God has imbued mankind with an innate spiritual nature that gives us the wisdom necessary to make moral decisions. Well, I hate to break it to you, but neither morality nor spirituality began with the Abrahamic God. They existed long before that. Humans have always been spiritual. There's no denying that. The question we must ask is, are humans innately spiritual because a God exists? Or is there some inherent desire written into our genetic code that has caused us to develop religion without a God to put it there? I think you'll find that science leans towards the latter option. Humans have always been seekers of knowledge. We crave explanations for our surroundings. We have an all-consuming desire to seek out answers for certain questions. Why are we here? How did we come to be? What is our purpose? These questions, and more, have plagued humanity from the dawn of our existence. They seem to be integral parts of how we think. And for most of our history, we have lacked the scientific ability to answer those questions. Yet, the questions still burned within us. We had to know. We needed to know. We needed to answer the burning questions which at that point in history were beyond our ability to understand. And so came the dawn of religion. Religion was created to answer those questions, and also help establish some kind of order to our primitive civilization. The methods used to achieve this were answering questions that people so desperately sought, and giving them a rule set that helped reduce the more chaotic elements among the masses. This on its own is not an inherently bad thing. In fact, quite the opposite. The problem is, the humans who created religion were just that, humans. They were not gods, they were not perfect. They were flawed, deeply so. And so, the God they created reflected their wicked qualities, as well as their good ones. Have you ever wondered why God never commanded that slavery be abolished? Or why women were forced to marry their rapists? Or why God didn't demand that we stop going to war? Or why the only way to save the world was to flood it, kill everything on it, and start over with one family? The answer to this has been staring you all in the face for the entirety of history. You simply refuse to see it, or choose to ignore it. The reason that Yahweh and his fellow gods across history are depicted as jealous, cruel, vindictive, spiteful, greedy, prideful, warlike, and tyrannical is because we are. We created Yahweh, not the other way around. And we also created every other god throughout the entirety of human history. They are proxies. They are byproducts of an era long past. They were meant to answer the questions of a primitive civilization, while inspiring fear and promoting order to satisfy the needs of those in power at that time. The sad reality is, those who most often seek power are most often those who least deserve it. This has been the case throughout all human history, and it continues to this day with Donald Trump. So, as these gods were created by primitive people, and they are the ones we still worship today, of course our gods seem primitive in their flashy miracles and boastful displays of abhorrent brutality. God is primitive because his creators were primitive. There is no absolute meaning in any of this. There is no greater purpose. The world is cruel. People die for no reason. Animals are brought to the brink of extinction and beyond every week. We ignore the cries of help from our own planet and continue to pollute our air, our oceans, and our forests. Those in power grow fat and rich, while ordinary citizens suffer. They sustain their existence by feeding upon the blood, sweat, and tears of those beneath them. They trade the blood of soldiers for political power, and they wield that strength towards greater fortune. And when the time comes for yet another unnecessary war, it is not these men who fight for our freedom. No, they sit on their backsides, and they watch as ordinary men march out to die by their command. And then they do it all over again. The cycle continues. The road goes ever on, down from the door where it began. We put countless soldiers in their graves for these weaklings. And for what? What did we gain? What is our reward? More war, more death, more suffering, more families torn apart and then left to stitch themselves back together. More mass graves full of soldiers who didn't need to die. This current regime defiles their memories. Our perpetual desire to consume, destroy, and control all those different than ourselves desecrates the graves of all those fallen brave throughout our history. Our hubris in thinking that our world will tolerate our constant abuse forever is naive and dangerous. No one is coming to save us from ourselves. And even if they did, why on earth would they even want to? What would they gain from it? We would just spread throughout the rest of the cosmos like a plague, and we would infect other civilizations with our toxicity. No one is coming to save us. Not aliens, and not God. In my opinion, the greatest evidence against the existence of God is the simple fact that he has never come back to save us. There is no evidence for the existence of a divine creator, but that leaves us with a problem. Religion is as old as we are, so where did it come from if not from God? I'll answer that question in a minute, but before I do, let me make something clear. The existence of a religion does not qualify for the existence of a God, and even if that alone were sufficient evidence, there would remain a massive problem to solve, which would ultimately prove impossible to figure out. That problem is the sheer number of gods that mankind has dreamed up throughout history, and how to determine once and for all which God is the right God. We'll examine that problem a bit later, but regardless, the words of Hitchens are undeniable, and Occam's razor is almost always a trustworthy logical tool. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, and the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Regarding the concept of God, the simplest explanation is that we created him to control other people by satisfying their curiosity about the world around us. God started out as a source of order and morality. The biblical idea of morality does not by any means fit with modern standards. but it served well for its time. The problem is that religion hasn't died yet. While God originated out of a desire for order, now he has been reduced to a tool used by a bunch of unscrupulous con artists to greedily line their pockets with your donations and your tax dollars, which they use to buy corporate jets and run for office in order to turn their own beliefs into law. And somehow, through some Herculean effort of stupidity, a lot of you still buy into it. Hook, line, and sinker. One of the main tenets of religion is the inherent link between the soul and consciousness. Obviously, we are the most intelligent life form on Earth, so some say that we must be divinely created. Those people would be wrong. Consciousness evolved with humanity. It is a product of evolution and nothing more. Homo habilis bears little resemblance to modern humans, and was very similar to a modern chimpanzee. It could use primitive stone tools, but was otherwise unremarkable as far as modern standards of intelligence. That's one of our ancestors, and through the process of natural selection, the skull size of Homo habilis increased due to the need for larger brains. After several evolutionary iterations, archaic Homo sapiens emerged into the Middle Paleolithic era. Those were our predecessors. They were distinguished from modern humans by a thicker skull, prominent brow ridges, and the lack of a prominent chin. Yet, their brain size ranged from 1,200 cubic centimeters to 1,400 cubic centimeters, which overlaps with the range of modern humans. There were several species grouped under this definition, such as the Cro-Magnon man and Neanderthals, although there is an ongoing debate as to whether Neanderthals were in fact a separate species. So to clear up this lie told at the altar, consciousness developed because we needed it to. It benefited us on an evolutionary scale. So it was made a biological imperative. Human women sought out partners who could protect them. And often that not only meant being stronger than his competition, but also smarter. Intelligence was a major benefit when it came to hunting. Some of the animals often hunted by early man were not only physically dangerous, but also smart enough to get the drop on early man. Several of these animals were so dangerous that they presented a threat for early man. Animals such as the dire wolf, the crocodile, and the smilodon were in direct competition for early man when it came to hunting prey. It was not only necessary to hunt these animals, but to also fend them off while hunting prey, and also defend that prey once it was caught. These animals were massive, and they presented a genuine threat for early man. So evolution selected intelligence as a way to compensate for early man's relative physical frailty. Had such competition not been there, our environment would not have necessitated such a change. We adapted to our environment, and that's all. If we hadn't needed such a change, we would likely still be in our caves to this very day. Even our basic moral and societal structures are easily explained by evolution. Humans are social animals, much like gorillas or chimpanzees. We have a clearly defined social hierarchy, and we tend to live in groups. To live in a group and survive, A species has to be able to work together with minimal infighting while still being able to propagate the species successfully. Lions are another example of a social animal. Lions achieved the previously mentioned requirements by having a dominant male that is the only one that mates with the females. That particular social trait serves as an assurance that the strongest male is the leader, and thus ensures a strong genetic line for the pride. That is why when a new male lion takes over the pride, he kills all of the offspring sired by the previous male. Lions evolved this way due to their environment. And likewise, humans evolved due to our environment. With such fierce competition, we needed to be stronger, smarter, and fiercer, simply to survive. And keep in mind that I only mentioned 3 of the many predators that were in competition with early humans. We had to survive, and so we developed tools. We evolved to have larger brains. And most importantly of all, we learned to live and hunt in groups. And to do that, the most important trait we needed was cooperation. So we developed a collective need to help each other. And as human infants are completely defenseless and unable to even feed themselves, we needed to make sure that they were taken care of. These biological imperatives were the proto-emotions that became empathy, love, and compassion. As humans became more plentiful, cities began to rise, and the need for cooperation became vital to prevent societal collapse. Yet, at the same time, it became more difficult to maintain. And out of that need, the first formal governments were created, along with the first formal religions. These institutions ensured the growth and stability of our earliest societies. They ensured the survival of our species until it became what we know today. The urge to belong to a group and to cooperate with that group is built into our genetic code. We have a deeply rooted biological need to help fellow humans who need our assistance. This isn't something that was given to us by God. It is merely something that evolved based on its essential nature to our survival. Intelligence is nothing special. An octopi that reaches 5 years of age can be equated to a 5-year-old human if it is taught properly. And octopi are very close to becoming a sapient species, which is a topic we will cover later in this video. For now, why don't we take a major step back? We've talked about how humans are not unique, but what about life itself? Surely the Earth is unique. I mean, it has to be, right? Wrong! There are many more Earth-like planets throughout the universe. So many, in fact, that the Earth not only lacks that singular uniqueness, but it is in fact rather unremarkable. The parameters for evaluating whether a planet can harbor life are simple. In the fields of astronomy and astrobiology, there is a term for this. The term is called the circumstellar habitable zone, and sometimes referred to as the Goldilocks zone. The CHZ is the range of orbits around a star within which a planetary surface can support liquid water given sufficient atmospheric pressure. This bit of knowledge is far from new. Since it was first presented in 1953, many stars have in fact been confirmed to have CHZ-compatible planets, and some solar systems have been confirmed to have multiple CHZ-compatible planets. And on November 4th, 2013, astronomers reported that there may in fact be 40 billion Earth-sized planets orbiting in CHZ-compatible zones. 11 billion of these planets may be orbiting stars similar to our Sun. These findings were based on data gathered from the orbital telescope Kepler, and those 40 billion planets are only from our Milky Way galaxy. Think of just how many CHZ-compatible planets are scattered all throughout the entire universe. So, now we know that there are plenty of planets with the potential for life. What we don't know is what caused that life to arise on our own. I can't answer that. The jury is still out. But just because we don't know does not mean that God is the answer. Oh, and by the way, every single bit of information, down to the smallest shred, is currently available on the internet, and it has been for some time. You don't need Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens to explain this. It is very simple to look for yourselves. The problem is that religious fundamentalists either don't know that it's actually there or don't want to look. In the latter case, they're just idiots. In the former case, they're ignorant. And it does not take a genius to fool ignorant and or stupid people. One thing that I will say for Trump is that he certainly knows how to fool gullible religious fundamentalists. Exactly when has he ever shown the slightest indication that he is a good Christian? Exactly what behavior gives you the idea that he is one of your flock? Well, I can tell you some of the evidence to the contrary. He commits adultery, he lies, he cheats, he steals, he's greedy, he's lazy, he's gluttonous. In fact, he personifies every single one of the 7 deadly sins at once. He is cruel to both his neighbor and his enemy indiscriminately, and has probably never been inside a church in his life. No, not even at Ivanka's wedding. She married a Jewish man. In my opinion, Trump is a consummate snowball artist. I don't think he's dumb. I don't think he's smart either. I think he's crafty. I think that he knows perfectly well that simply telling you he's a good Christian will be enough. That simply telling you that he'll make America great again is enough to persuade you. Honestly, I'm a better Christian than Trump ever was. I might not believe in God, but I support the golden rule, I support love thy neighbor, and love thy enemy. I don't hate any of you. I act with honesty and integrity. I defend the poor and the weak and the disenfranchised, something that Jesus did in his lifetime. Trump is a very poor Christian, and I am not implying that you should flock to me for answers. I'm just a guy who rants on YouTube. I don't have the answers you're looking for. I'm not asking you to devote your lives to me. I'm not God. I'm asking you to think for yourselves. That is all I'm asking. I don't care what you do otherwise. Just think. But honestly, it doesn't matter what I say. Trump supporters will argue that regardless of Trump's belief, or lack thereof, he is there for a reason. They will argue that he is part of God's plan. According to Christians, God has a plan. At least, that's what they have been led to believe. I regret that I must disabuse you of that mistaken idea. I'm afraid that God's plan is in fact a logical paradox. It doesn't exist, and it cannot exist. Let me explain why. You are convinced that everything is guided by the hand of an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and omnibenevolent creator. And said creator created an infallible book, which we must live by, or be damned to eternal hellfire. And that creates a massive problem. You have to prove that everything which exists, which has ever existed, and which ever will exist, is absolutely 100% consistent with that creator and his book. I'm afraid I really must tell you, that is logically impossible. You cannot defend the omnipotence, because the concept of omnipotence is a logical paradox. If God is all-powerful, then can he create something more powerful than himself? If he can, he loses his omnipotence, because he is no longer the most powerful being in the universe. If he can't, he still loses his omnipotence, because that is something he cannot do. And the definition of omnipotence is being all-powerful and having the ability to do anything. You cannot defend omniscience without contradicting free will. And if there's no free will, then it doesn't matter what I do or what any of us does, because God already knows the outcome of every choice I make, every choice you make, and every choice any of us makes. In the face of total omniscience, free will is a meaningless illusion. And if God is not 100% omniscient, then exactly why hasn't he made himself omniscient? Once again, omnipotence. And even if free will does exist, then by default, God's plan does not exist. And if it does, and our free will can contradict that plan, then we are back to the paradox of omnipotence. Omnipresence is inherently linked with omnibenevolence, with each one negating the existence of the other. If God has been everywhere at once forever, then why did the Holocaust happen? He can raise the dead, but somehow people still got horrible diseases, and they still do to this day. People continue to kill each other, despite God having the ability to throw all weapons on Earth into space and remove any trace of violence from the human soul. God could have struck the Parkland shooter dead in his tracks. He could have vaporized Elliot Rodger. He could have made Timothy McVeigh bleed from every orifice and emblazon a holy symbol on his body as a message to everyone. With a mere snap of his fingers, he could stop climate change in its tracks. God could fix every problem that mankind has ever had or ever will have. Do you know why he doesn't? Because, repeat after me, God does not exist. And if a being such as God does exist, I'd wager that his divine plan is to impose the will of those who preach his word. Of course, the only proof of God's existence is the word of Christians. And it's not like they would ever lie to us, right? I mean, they certainly don't have a vested interest in maintaining control over the masses. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? If you were to ask me personally, I would say that the existence of the Abrahamic God is impossible. His very nature is a Mobius loop of paradoxes. God is as real as Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. He's a fairy tale, a made-up story. That's it. Now, you might argue that if God does not exist, then we don't get to go to an eternal paradise when we die. And I would answer that with, really? You think heaven is a paradise? That's very amusing. You preach that worldly pursuits are sinful, and that we should seek our glory in the kingdom above, instead of enjoying our short time here on earth. Well, I can't speak for others, but personally, I'll take my simple worldly happiness over the meaningless attempts to gain the favor of a non-existent old wizard in the sky every time I'm given the chance. I would honestly rather live a good, happy life without God and then die than spend eternity in bliss while I am forced to watch people I love burn forever and be unable to mourn them. If you ask me, being happy while people I love burn in hell, while being unable to remove that happiness and mourn them, is the real hell. If I went to the biblical hell, then at the very least I'd retain my humanity, instead of becoming the spiritual equivalent of the lotus eaters. And while Christians say that no moral person would advocate for atheism, and only a truly wicked person would encourage a lifestyle that would deny eternal paradise to others and most of all their friends and family, I, on the other hand, say the opposite. I say that denying them such an existence is in fact saving them, on the off chance that I am wrong and God really does exist. The difference is that I don't preach to other people as if I were a religious zealot. If others ask me, I tell them. But I never go up to my friends or my family and rub their noses in it. And you know what? I have plenty of theist friends and plenty of theist family members, and I get along with them just fine. They do not judge me, and I do not judge them. The average believer in God is not a problem that I concern myself with. It is fanatics, zealots, moral crusaders, and bigots that I have a problem with. Self-righteous, egotistical, moralizing idiots who think that having a 2,000-year-old book of fairy tales gives them an inherent level of superiority to the rest of us. I have a problem with arrogant fools who proudly wear their ignorance upon their sleeves and believe that ignorance gives them the title of Grand High Poobah of all humanity. Do you know why Christians never win debates with atheists? It isn't because we rig things in our favor. The simple reality is, they have to prove far more than we do. We freely admit that we don't have all the answers. We admit that for some things we may never have the answers. We freely admit our fallibility. and we embrace it with open arms. On the other hand, the extremist followers of religious dogma are convinced that everything is guided by the hand of an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent creator that has always existed and pulls our strings like puppets. And like I said, that is logically impossible. They also have to prove the moral superiority of that God. They have to justify every single horrible thing that has happened throughout history. And they have to do it in a way that is consistent with their God. And one of the many moral justifications they have to make is that some people burn in hell while others enjoy heaven. Sorry, Christians, no thanks. I will take my simple, happy, mortal existence over your concept of paradise, because I would rather endure eternal torture while retaining my humanity than spend my afterlife as a brainwashed slave. Yes, that is what your God would do to us in heaven. He would brainwash us, all of us. He would strip away everything that makes us who we are. And at that point, are we really good people anymore? Without the ability to mourn those who suffer, to empathize with them, to feel anger at the being responsible for this injustice. Without these emotions, are we even human anymore? Fundamentalist Christians often say how they'd go mad if they believed that they'd never see their loved ones again. Well, I'm the opposite. I would go mad if I knew that innocent people were suffering forever, some of whom were my family and friends, while I would be forced to watch and be unable to feel even the slightest shred of empathy, compassion, sorrow, guilt, or shame. The sheer, unabashed wickedness of any God who would create such an existence would cause me to immediately commit suicide. If he were proven to exist, I would kill myself, since that would guarantee me a place in hell. The existence of your God would not make me happy. It wouldn't magically make me want to serve that God. Even if your God was proven to exist, I would never, ever, under any circumstances whatsoever, choose to worship him. He is a monster, and if he were all loving by any standard that we could identify, then he would at least share some semblance of our desire to live in peace and harmony. If you need any proof of his wickedness, then why don't we go for a stroll down memory lane? Remember when God tortured a man who devoted his entire life to worshiping the God that tortured him. And he did this simply because Satan dared him to. Do you remember that? That was the story of Job. Do you remember when God destroyed 2 entire cities? When he left only one family alive? When he turned the wife in that family into a pillar of salt, simply because she had the audacity to look back at the destruction of everything she had ever known. And then, to top it all off, he just sat back and watched as that man's 2 daughters liquored up their dad and took turns raping him. Does that story ring a bell? Let me jog your memory. That was the story of Sodom, Gomorrah, and Lot. Oh, and God only spared Lot because of his supposed good heart. And he did this knowing that Lot offered up his daughters as human sacrifices to a rape mob. Yeah, that's not good. But it gets worse. Do you remember when God destroyed everyone and everything on the planet? Every single living thing on the planet drowned in a flood. Do you remember that story? That was the story of Noah. God didn't just destroy the people, he destroyed the trees and the animals and everything else. And he only left two of every kind. First of all, kind is a meaningless term. Second of all, that's impossible. A species cannot repopulate in such a manner. There is not enough genetic diversity. The flood did not happen. Or can you explain how those animals repopulated without sounding like an idiot? Well, I will save you a lot of time and effort. You cannot explain that. It is wrong on a moral level. It is wrong on a biological level. It is wrong on a logical level. It is wrong by every single measure we can use. Good old Yahweh. If people displease him enough, he simply destroys everyone and or tortures them. What fathomless benevolence. What limitless wisdom. What deathless love. What a fantastic almighty Father. Yeah, I'd sooner take my chances with Satan. You will never convert me. No one can. It is impossible. It doesn't really matter whether God is real or imaginary. I will die before I worship such a tyrant, and I will gladly be tortured forever. Your God is one of the most vile, malevolent, repugnant ideas that mankind has ever created, and the greatest consolation I have in life is the simple fact that he does not exist. And just so you know how far I am willing to go to make sure that I never have a place in his imaginary false paradise, I am going to do the unforgivable. I, Alejandro Cortez, hereby reject and denigrate the Holy Spirit. I call it a wretched pile of putrefying carrion. There. Now there is nothing left to save. Give up. Now, if morality, logic, and the promise of paradise have all failed, then surely statistics will arrive in the nick of time to rescue religion from the winter of its discontent. Nope! I hate to break it to you, but the statistics are all wrong, and the history of the Bible is also wrong. I hate to break it to you, but the Gospels never met Jesus. Even the earliest Gospel was written well after the death of Christ. Most historians, including a lot of biblical historians, agree that the Gospel of Paul was written between 57 and 58 AD, almost 60 years after the death of Jesus. The Gospel of Mark was written 10 years after that, at 70 AD, and 15 years after that, the Gospel of Matthew was written at 85 AD. Most historians also believe that the Gospel of Luke was written between 85 and 95 AD, while the Gospel of John finished things up between 90 and 100 AD. Now, average life expectancy was slightly longer for women than for men. On average, it was about 50 years. But even if I say that Paul only met Jesus during the year of his death, he would still have needed to live 60 years past the death of Christ and remain cognizant long enough to write down a coherent narrative. Such a thing is technically possible, seeing that this is the average lifespan and not the absolute lifespan. However, it still doesn't hold up. In order for Paul to be 60 at 57 or 58 AD, he would have to be born 2 years before the death of Jesus. It is quite possible that he was 58. The thing is, that still requires him to be an infant at the time. It isn't possible. Any way you slice it makes Paul an infant at the time, which makes his statements impossible for obvious reasons. Paul would have to be at least 80 years old when he died, which would put him 30 years beyond the average human lifespan of the time. And that is something that would almost certainly be recorded in the history books. That wasn't something that happened very often back then. It was in fact quite rare. Mark, on the other hand, would be a zygote, while Matthew, Luke, and John wouldn't even be that much. During the time of Jesus, the parents of Matthew, Luke, and John probably weren't even born yet, because people usually got married in their early teens at the time of Jesus. People often forget or simply don't understand just how different things were back then. Another common argument is the argument of martyrdom. People say that Christians have died for their beliefs over and over throughout history, so that must mean something. Unfortunately, that argument fails to meet logical standards. The followers of Jim Jones, David Koresh, Marshall Applewhite, and other cult leaders all died for their beliefs as well, making them martyrs. 909 people died in Jonestown, 86 in Waco, and 39 during the Heaven's Gate event in San Diego, California. In addition, Susan Atkins worshipped Charles Manson, and she endured imprisonment for the murder of Sharon Tate at the behest of the cult leader. She never showed any remorse for what she did, and she called Manson a god until her dying breath. She carried her beliefs of Manson's godhood to her grave, making her a martyr. As you can see, being a martyr doesn't prove anything, except that the martyrs in question are convinced that they are right. On a side note, it often proves that they are psychotic. And as I have proven, none of that is unique to Christianity. You might ask me that if Christianity is false, then how do I explain its rise to prominence? I'll answer that question with two of my own. How do you explain the rise of Scientology, a religion created by a science fiction writer for the express purpose of fleecing gullible people? Despite its ridiculous claims and scamming tactics that make emails from so-called Nigerian bankers look reasonable, Scientology has gained 27,000 members worldwide. Even though that number is tiny, that does not explain anything. Their claims are even more ridiculous than yours. They should have no followers, and the fact that it deliberately uses vapid celebrities as a calculated method of advertising should not surprise me at all. I know just how despicable religion can be, and yet it still manages to sink to levels that should place it at the center of the earth. And the number of people who believe in Scientology pales in comparison to Islam, the fastest growing religion on the planet. The growth rate for Islam is 1.1%. There are approximately 7.53 billion people on Earth. That means that Islam gains over 8.2 million followers a year. It is estimated that by 2030, Muslims will make up a quarter of the world's population. Islam utterly eclipses Christianity when it comes to both birth rate and conversion rate. And Muslims are far more likely to martyr themselves for their God than Christians are. The only thing said by the argument of martyrdom is I don't know what the appeal to popularity fallacy is. So the next question is one I mentioned earlier. I said that simply proving the existence of a God would matter very little. And that is because we would have no way of telling which God is the right God. Okay, religious folks, let me explain this to you. There are two kinds of people. The first kind measures, examines, experiences, tests, and quantifies various things around them in an attempt to answer the question of why the world exists and how it came into being. This person is a scientist and a skeptic. The second person believes whatever nonsense they are fed without question and puts their faith in gods. The problem is, there are quite a lot of gods. Ra, Zeus, Odin, Quetzalcoatl, Baal, Krishna, Viracocha, Allah, Yahweh. Those are just a few. Can you be certain that your God is the correct one? What if Ra is the one true God? Can you say that you have done enough good that when your heart is weighed by Mot, it will be lighter than a feather, and thereby gain you passage aboard Ra's boat, so you can sail to the land of two fields? Would you be willing to be sacrificed in order to go to the paradise offered by the Aztecs? Could you meet the exceedingly high standards of Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacchus, and be judged as worthy to enter Elysium? Are you confident enough that if you were reborn 3 times, that you would still be virtuous enough to enter Elysium each time and be granted access to the Isles of the Blessed? Can you meet the complicated standards of Hinduism and travel the path of the sun instead of that of the moon? Are you willing to die in battle only to continue fighting constantly until you perish during Ragnarok? Those are the afterlives of 5 of the 9 gods that I listed. And guess what, buddy boy? There are hundreds more. No matter which one you pick, no matter whose standards you live by, you may end up realizing too late that you just chose wrong. The absence of an explanation does not automatically imply that God is responsible. And it especially does not imply that your God is responsible. That argument is known as Pascal's wager, and it is ridiculous. Another argument is the God of the gaps fallacy. The God of the gaps fallacy occurs when someone states that because there is a gap in our knowledge, then the existence of such a gap is evidence of God. The problem is, you can make that same argument with anything. For example, I have never been attacked by a hobo, and that must mean that Atragor, the invisible, intangible, and all-powerful Emperor of Demons, protects me every day from hobos by placing peaceful thoughts into their heads when I walk past. This is an unverifiable hypothesis. There is no way to prove it wrong. Even if you interviewed every hobo I've walked past in my life, I could simply say that Atragor leaves no traces of his meddling in human affairs. It is impossible to prove or disprove. You just have to take my word for it. And because of that, the God of the gaps fallacy doesn't work. You are making the exact same argument. You cannot simply take something we don't know and declare the answer is God without proving that he actually is. Maybe it's Allah that created the universe. Or maybe the universe was created by the primordial god Chaos. Or maybe it was Ra, or Baal, or Quetzalcoatl, or Odin, or any of the other hundreds of gods that mankind has created throughout history. The problem is, you don't know. And you don't know because in the end, you cannot prove that your God is the one that created the universe any more than any other theist can prove theirs is. That is faulty logic at its finest. But I have an idea, a radical idea, an unthinkable idea. But it is an idea that may make you happier in the end. Decide for yourself what's right and wrong. Bow to no one, submit to no one, kneel before no authority, least of all that of a god. Free your minds from the chains of dogma that bind them. Open yourself to the ideas of those other than yourself and the people who agree with you. Seek out your own answers. Make your own decisions. Choose to do and be what you want. And if you come back after all that soul-searching and say, I've looked at the world, and I still think that Christianity is a force for good. I believe in God, and I'm going to remain a part of Christianity. If you say that, I'll reply with this. Okay then, if that's how you think, and if being part of Christianity helps you make the world a better place, then go right ahead. Go for it. And do you know why that will always be my reply? Well, it's because I am not God. I'm not omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, or omnibenevolent. I don't inherently know what's best for you. I'm just giving you my advice based on my life experience. Nothing more. I am just an ordinary human. That's all I've ever been, and that's all I'll ever be. But why is that a problem? How is my existence sinful simply because I don't believe in your God? How am I any less of a person than you? I've got a mother and father who love me, a sister who I've learned more from than anybody else, friends who I'd give my life for, the memory of 3 wonderful grandparents, one of whom was a civil rights activist who shook the hand of Rosa Parks. Another was a man of few words, but nearly infinite wisdom. And the last was the kindest, gentlest woman to ever walk this earth. And guess what? She was a Christian. Despite everything I've said here on the topic of Christianity, I don't hate Christians. I hate those who use God as a tool to justify their own petty desires and bigotries. I hate those who hide behind God while they oppress others. I hate those such as William Lane Craig, who try to make Christianity fit into science and vice versa. Listen to me. I don't hate you. I don't want to take away your belief in God. I don't want to oppress you. The only thing I need to hear from you in order to guarantee that you will never hear from me again are 4 very simple sentences. Here they are. I cannot prove that God exists. I simply believe with all my heart that he is there. I accept that other people have a right to not believe in God, and I will stop trying to save those who do not wish to be saved. I will not use God as an excuse to legislate my own beliefs, moral or otherwise, or as an excuse to enforce what is taught in schools. I will not allow my beliefs to color my judgment so thoroughly that it harms another person, most importantly my child. These are the magic words which will make me go away. Those are what I call Alejandro's 4 commandments for religious decency. It doesn't really matter what religion you belong to. As long as you follow those 4 commandments, you will not hear any complaints from me. During the course of this video, I have talked quite a lot about the various problems with religion. But how will it end? What event could spell the end for religion? What could possibly be so threatening that it would cause a mass exodus away from religion? Some say that the discovery of non-human sapient life will destroy the last bastions of religion. Others think that if mankind were to ever develop a way to create life on our own, religion would wither and die due to lack of nutrients. Now, all of that is just science fiction and therefore impossible, right? Wrong. Very, very wrong. The question that is on my mind relates to a difficult thought experiment I've been pondering. The experiment deals with cultural psychology, particularly when it comes to religion, and how that psychology reacts to scientific progress. My hypothesis is there are 3 death knells that herald the destruction of the Abrahamic religions. They are as follows. The indisputable discovery of a clear non-human sapient species, the creation of an AI that is completely indistinguishable from human life, and the perfection of human cloning. All of these have 3 main messages that religion will be unable to answer. Number 1, if non-human sapient life exists, then is that life bound by the same divine laws which supposedly govern us? If so, then why was that life not mentioned in the Bible? And if not, then how do we define sapient life? Number 2, if we have the ability to create sapient life on our own, and that sapient life cannot be distinguished from the creators, said creators being us, then do our creations have souls? According to most scriptural interpretations, the soul is what is responsible for morality. And if these creations do not display our sense of morality, then all we have created are soulless abominations. But if they do share our morality, then we have effectively proven that souls are irrelevant. Since, like I said, according to Abrahamic doctrine, only God can create souls. Number 3, if sapient life other than ourselves exists, then is that life also created in God's image? And what does that mean for us and our idea of human exceptionalism? In my opinion, Abrahamic religions have no answers to any of these questions that do not involve massive changes to the fundamental doctrines. They open a Pandora's box full of all sorts of uncomfortable questions that are currently safely within the zone of the theoretical. And once answered, all of these questions will create more questions, until Abrahamic religions have no choice but to either adapt and change so much that they become unrecognizable, or be swept away as the ceaseless march of history continues. If that happens, they will be relegated to mythology, along with the religious beliefs of the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the Norse, the ancient Egyptians, the Native Americans, the Mesopotamians, and other dead religions. Those of you who believe in the Abrahamic God should keep the following maxims in mind. Today's religion is tomorrow's myth, and yesterday's science fiction is today's science fact. Cell phones, credit cards, mood-enhancing pills, tablets, electric cars, bionic limbs, and even the internet were once just ideas born from science fiction. And those are only a few of the countless examples of science fiction that became science fact. Now, you might still argue that non-human life is ridiculous, as we cannot leave the planet, so we will not find it for centuries, and probably millennia. And obviously, we have no idea how to create life ourselves. You would say such things are insane. Well, if you said any of that, you'd be wrong. Some scientists expect that the singularity will occur in as little as 30 years. That is well within my lifetime. I will be 60 at that point. In addition, we already have the ability to clone animals, and honestly, religion is the only barrier left towards beginning the science of human cloning. And as for non-human life, surprisingly, that isn't as far-fetched as you'd think. We have no need to leave our planet. The species we seek is already here. It has been for quite a long time, and all it needs is the time necessary for evolution to do its job. I mentioned that species earlier. It is the octopus. Octopi are in fact only one mutation away from becoming sapient. If they manage to adapt so that they stop dying after they reproduce, and they gain a longer lifespan, they could very well become like us. A 5-year-old octopus can become as smart as a 5-year-old human if educated properly. Studies have been done to prove it. If a 5-year-old octopus has such intellectual capability, then imagine what an 80-year-old octopus would be like if it had access to the same education that we do. The only thing that octopi require is time. As long as they don't go extinct, they will catch up to us soon enough. It is only a matter of time. And before very long, we may even be able to speed up their evolution ourselves. Once we can control the evolution of another species, it is only a matter of time before we do the same with ours. And then, things will become very interesting indeed. Exactly what can threaten religion? That can. It removes the idea of human exceptionalism when you realize that other life forms can become like us without the assistance of God. Maybe one day they will even replace us as the dominant life form on Earth. Stranger things have happened, and octopi live underwater, so they have never seen any fruit of any kind, much less entered a garden. So they can't exactly be held responsible for the so-called sins of humans. How can something have original sin if it was never sapient during the time of Eden? And can something non-human reasonably be held responsible for our supposed sins? These are two of the many questions that religious scholars and philosophers will need to answer in order to maintain control over their respective flocks. No amount of Jordan Peterson lectures will explain that. When octopi gain sapience, a door will be opened, and inside that door are all sorts of nasty, inconvenient questions, like, for example, can non-human creatures go to heaven if they are equal to us? Do non-human creatures with sapience have souls? Is non-human sapience a part of God's plan? Are humans really so special that an almighty being created us in his image? And finally, how do we know that God isn't actually an octopus? Those are just the questions I can think of. And when the octopi join the conversation, that is when shit will get really crazy. The discovery of non-human sapient life, the development of an AI that is identical to human life, and the perfection of human cloning are the biggest threats to religion that currently exist. All of these destroy the current religious concept of a creator by either simply making us accept our own insignificance, destroying the idea that only God could create sapient life without biological reproduction, or both. But, just for funsies, how about a few more of those nasty, inconvenient questions? If only God can bestow souls, then did he bestow them on other sapient life forms? If we can create sapient life without God's help, then do such beings have souls? If our creations are indistinguishable from us, then either we can create souls, or souls are irrelevant. Any of those three discoveries will signal the final death knell for religion. And all of them are much closer than most of us think, when even one of these comes to pass. And trust me, they will. Religion will end. Those with any intelligence will flee their churches in droves, and those who cling desperately to their religious dogma will be forced to accept reality. Even the dogmatic cannot hide from truth forever. The light of truth shall reveal those things which they hide away in the darkest parts of their minds. It shall reveal the fear that they chose to ignore. When those things are no longer hidden, there are only two choices: accept them or go mad. Personally, I think that madness is the only option for the truly dogmatic when they are faced with the hateful visage of inescapable truth. For the religious, that truth is that the human species is not exceptional, that we are not special, that we are not unique, that we are not divinely inspired or created. Without such delusions, and trust me when I say they are indeed delusions, religion will end, and the religious will have nowhere left to hide from the truth. They'll go completely mad when they understand the truth of their insignificance. I really do hope that I'll get to see it happen. I always love watching the hope drain from those who proudly embrace their ignorance. It doesn't really matter what the ignorant beliefs are. The feeling of joy as I watch those beliefs evaporate remains the same. It is both beautiful and terrible, like a storm which ravages an ancient city, tearing up foundations that have been there for centuries. There is no greater terror than realizing that you've devoted your entire life to worshiping a delusion. There is no greater despair than that of a wasted life. And there is no greater delusion than religion, and likewise no greater waste of time than praying to something that simply isn't listening. Because, after all, it never existed to begin with. After that, madness is not only inevitable, but also a mercy. The fell song of madness shall play feverishly inside their heads until they are consumed by it. All good things must one day end, and so must it be that all evil things will one day perish. After all, no matter what version of the story you may read, Wendy always leaves Neverland in the end, and she always decides that growing up and living in the real world is preferable to living in the fantasy world of a child. If one never grows up, then one never learns, and never gains wisdom. One never gains experience, and one simply stagnates in an existence where no change is possible. Everyone grows up in the end, even mankind. We cannot remain in Neverland forever. One day, we will decide to leave, and those who choose to stay will be left behind, much like Peter Pan, and they will be alone. That will indeed be sad for us, but it will be saddest of all for them, as they will remain inside a prison of their own design, without a clue as to how they might escape, or even the desire for freedom in the first place. Of course, at this point in time, all of this is purely academic, but as an atheist, it really would fascinate me to see Christianity, Islam, and Judaism vanish into the void after being visited by the ghosts of religions past, present, and future. I wonder how the faithful will react. to irrefutable proof of both evolution and the creation of life that can easily be demonstrated right before their very eyes. It really is such a pity that I'll probably never find out. But honestly, maybe it's better that way. Such a discovery would cause massive societal upheaval, and that kind of chaos would make it rather difficult indeed to enjoy my books. Nevertheless, they will vanish, one way or the other, and the world will move on without them. We will reach higher and higher, while they remain on the ground. Eventually, we will all fly away, and they will be left behind. I really hope I'll get to see it. I don't fear what lies ahead. In fact, I invite all of you to hop in and go for a drive with me into the wondrous future that lies in store for all of us. There will be detours, shortcuts, and we may even get stopped for speeding several times. And of course, we will be driving for quite a while. We may never even reach our destination at all. In fact, we probably won't. But the destination doesn't matter, as nothing lasts forever. The journey is what's really important. You, me, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and so on. We will all see history be made. We may not see it all, but that doesn't really matter. All that matters is the road. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can. Whatever lies at the end of that road is something that we will never know. But one thing is undeniable. It'll be one hell of a ride. Now that you properly understand religion, I suppose you can visualize the kind of future that its followers would create. You probably feel that the end is nigh. Things may very well look bleak to you, and you may be losing hope. And I would imagine that you are very, very afraid. Let me alleviate a few of those fears. Do not be afraid. I won't lie to you. Things look bleak, very bleak, and the chance of our survival is very slim. But that isn't a reason to give up. Things have appeared very bleak before, and yet we have endured. And if it is in fact our time, well, that's that. Death is nothing to be afraid of. The end is not really the end. All things end, and all things begin again. All of this has happened before, and all of it shall happen again. The truth about life is that it never really dies. Western civilization will one day die. Even humanity will one day die. But from the ashes will be born something new. Something will rise from our ashes like a phoenix. The cycle of death and rebirth is the only universal constant. That is the way of things. Do not be afraid. If it is our time to go, then that is how it must be. However, while we may perish, take heart in the knowledge that new life will be born from our ashes. Nothing lasts forever. Humanity will one day pass into the void. It was never a question of if, only of when. Twilight is upon us. Soon, night must fall. But dawn always comes to drive away the shadows. Do not be sad. Do not be afraid. All is not yet lost. There may still be time to change our destiny. Fate is not immutable. The future can be changed. There is nothing in the universe or beyond it that can stand against the collective will of mankind. Not even God. Keep that in mind when you watch the news. Everyone is gazing at the chaos around them, watching the misery, the pain, the oppression, the ignorance, the hatred, the violence, and everyone is afraid. When everyone is telling you that horrible things are happening, that they need to be dealt with, or they'll destroy us all, and you don't really know who to believe, because everyone seems to have an agenda. Everyone seems to have an ulterior motive. You don't really know who you can trust, and I would imagine that you are very, very afraid, but you don't need to be. Fear doesn't benefit any of us if we take it to an extreme. If our final day of reckoning is at hand, then irrational fear will only hasten its descent. No matter how things may look, or what horrible things may happen, you mustn't be devoured by fear. Stop attempting to control your life, and instead, simply live it. All that time you spend living in fear is better spent enjoying the world in which you live, and also the many worlds which we have created. Nothing good ever came from dwelling too much on fear. The world will one day end. That much is certain. But it will not end today. If you are looking for an enemy, don't look to Satan. The only true enemy we have is ourselves. When the world comes to an end, no matter what form it may take, that end will be of our own making. We decide how we live, and it is we who shall decide how we die. The future is ours, not God's. Our path is one that we must decide. No one else can or will choose it for us. We have to save ourselves. The exact nature of what is to come remains shielded, even from the wise. Not a single living being can say for certain what the future holds. However, the wise all agree on a single common thread. A storm is coming. A mighty tempest threatens to sweep away all that we have built. It threatens to carry away all that we love. That storm has come before. It has returned over and over throughout the history of mankind, ever increasing in strength as it continues its ceaseless attempts to shatter the foundations of our civilizations. The time is once again approaching when the world will be engulfed in the chaos of the oncoming storm. When that time comes, we must either weather that storm once more, or we must finally crack and fall crashing to the earth, where we will rot away. Many paths lie before us, and very few lead to our survival. Fewer still lead to a future worth surviving. The truth is that we may very well be past the point of no return. If that is the case, then many things great and fair shall fade, vanish, and be forgotten. If we are to prevent such a terrible future from arriving, then we must ask ourselves 3 questions, and we must answer them not with our minds, but with our hearts. What kind of future do we wish to live in? Are we on the path to that future? And how best can we ensure that we remain on the path to that future? When we can agree on that, everything else will fall into place, like a cascade of dominoes. We are no longer a species of children. The time is long since past when we had the luxury of childish squabbles, immature grudges, and puerile groupthink. Our survival hinges on one single sentence. United we stand, divided we fall. The future remains uncertain, but one fact is in fact very certain. The longer we sit idle upon our thrones of complacency, content to watch, but never interfere, the clearer that future becomes. And a future where we sit idle during the oncoming storm is a future of oblivion, as is a future where we are unprepared for such a storm. All of us, you, me, allies, enemies, and all those who still remain content in their neutrality. It doesn't really matter where you come from or what your beliefs are. All of you matter. Extinction is permanent. No one is immune. And while that might be terrifying, remember a few things. The hate of men will pass. Dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. All of the misery, the suffering, the hatred, the anger, the oppression, the corruption, the tyranny, and the greed is nothing but the bitterness of those who fear the way of human progress. In order to combat such people, we must fight to free the world from tyranny. We must do away with national borders. We must do away with greed, hatred, intolerance, and corruption. If we believe in ourselves, dogmatic thinkers cannot even touch us. They rely on our fear, and together we can overcome that fear. And on that day, dogmatic thinking will disappear forever. If we believe in ourselves, then dogmatic thinking has no effect on us. And if we believe in each other, then there is nothing we cannot do. Peace, love, empathy, tolerance, and unconditional acceptance of those different than us are the swords which will pierce the darkness and melt all those hearts that are currently encased in ice. By refusing to play by the rules of dogma, we disarm the weapons they throw at us. That is the bane of all dogmatic ideologies: left, right, and center. Feminism, men's rights, MGTOWs, SJWs, racial supremacists, moral absolutists, fanatical constitutionalists, nationalists, fanatical libertarians, fascists, authoritarians, ANCAPs, ANCOMs, religions of all shapes and sizes, partisan politicians and their congregations, those who refuse to believe the truth, even when it is thrust, wiggling in their faces. They are all just children who haven't yet grown up. Dogmatic thinking is the thinking of children. Those children may grow up, and they may not. Only time knows for sure, and time will never give up those secrets. Part of growing up is making mistakes. If we never made mistakes, then we'd never learn from those mistakes. And that would make life very boring indeed. Do not hate the dogmatic. Never hate the dogmatic. They do not understand the truth, and we cannot force it upon them. If you give in to hate, you risk joining their ranks. Have some sympathy for the damned, and just give them the time they need to grow up. I think that humanity will one day grow up. In fact, I am certain of it. Only one person never grows up, and he lives on only through the printed word. Even the Lost Boys grew up in the end, and they chose to grow up of their own free will. They just needed a little help to get there. Remember, just because someone is lost does not necessarily mean that they will be lost forever. Sometimes, all they need is a small push in the right direction. Some choose to live in echo chambers and thereby never expose themselves to that push. They grow old and they die without even realizing they've spent their entire lives in a box. Such people are common, and they cannot change because they refuse to open their ears and listen. You cannot save those who refuse to be saved. That is a truth that religious people begrudgingly accept, and it is part of a larger truth. You cannot help those who refuse to accept help. That is just a natural fact of life. The world will move on without such people, while they remain encased in their prisons of stone. We will ascend so high that we eventually become the gods mankind once worshipped in what will then be days that have long since passed. One day, we will transcend even that and become something that not a single human being living today, including myself, can possibly imagine. The dogmatic thinkers will stay here on the ground, sitting in the dark solitude of their halls of stone, and we will gain wings and fly away. But while such a future is possible, it is not certain. We cannot simply let dogma go unchallenged, or the darkness will only grow. A storm is coming. The fate of mankind will rest upon our shoulders. Every human being will one day be forced to choose sides in the greatest battle ever faced by mankind. This will not be a battle against tyranny, persecution, or injustice. It will be a battle against annihilation. We will be fighting for our right to live, to exist, to survive. And we will not be fighting one another in this battle, nor will we be facing an external threat at all. Instead, we will be fighting against the evil within our own hearts. This will be a battle of humanity against its own proclivity towards self-destructive behavior. We will be fighting the very nature of our biology itself. It is the oldest war that has ever been waged. It is a war that mankind has waged since the dawn of our existence. This war predates Gilgamesh, and it has existed long before we had the ability to record our battles. This war has existed for as long as we have, and it has grown as we have grown. Like us, the darkness is ever changing, ever growing, and as we continue to evolve, so shall it. This is not a war that we can win. It never was, and it never will be. Evil is as much a part of us as good. We no more have the power to destroy it than we have the power to stop the ceaseless march of time. We cannot defeat this evil. All we can do is delay it. Should we survive, then hundreds, maybe thousands of years after we lay the evil to rest once more, the responsibility will fall upon our descendants to take up arms and send it back into the slumber from which it awakened. This is a war with no end, and therefore a war we cannot win. We will one day tire, become complacent, arrogant. We may forget the battles of the past, or otherwise lose our way, and on that day, we will be consumed. We cannot win this war. But since when has the inevitability of defeat ever been a reason to stop fighting? No matter what happens, I'll never stop fighting. Ever. And I encourage every single one of you on this planet to do the same. Show the slumbering dragon that we aren't finished just yet. Keep on fighting. Don't stop. Don't give up. And never, ever be afraid. Well, this looks like the end. But this is not really the end. This is only the end of a beginning in a long series of beginnings that once came to an end. That's all time is. That's all history is. One long series of beginnings. Our story may end, but there are so many stories left to be told. Don't you think it's a bit selfish of us to think that our story is the only one that doesn't have an ending? Don't be afraid. Our story is only one chapter in a very long book. We are just a chapter in the infinite story of time. And the story of time never truly ends. No matter what happens, remember this. You are fantastic. Don't ever try to live forever. You'll fail. And trust me, you do not want eternity anyway. I may not be that old in body, but I am very old in mind. Trust me when I say, I am old enough to know that a longer life isn't always a better one. In the end, you just get tired. Tired of the struggle. Tired of losing everyone that matters to you. Tired of watching everything you love turn to dust. If you live long enough, the only certainty left is that you'll end up alone. And a life of solitude is no life at all. A mortal life is the most valuable thing in the universe. When you live forever, there are no surprises. Eventually, you experience everything that can be experienced, and you lose your appreciation and your enthusiasm for life. Your life and the lives of those around you become trivial and meaningless. In the end, you are all alone. You stop caring. Eventually, the universe loses its color, and you are left in an eternal existence of gray. And in the end, even you become gray. But if you are mortal, the universe is full to bursting with all sorts of vibrant colors. Every color we can think of is here, and even some that do not yet exist. The life of a mortal being is the most fantastic thing in the universe. You have one life, and you treasure that life above all else. The ones you love also have a finite existence, and you value the time you have with those people so much because you know that one way or the other, you will lose them. And that isn't a future to be afraid of. It's a future that should be celebrated. You had all the time you needed with the person you value most, and it would have been meaningless if you lived forever. The things that are most precious in this world are those that are finite. Such things only have the great value that they do because they are one of a kind. You are one of a kind, and so is every other person on Earth, including the people you value most. Once you are gone, and they are gone, that's it. No second chances. No coming back. Death is forever. And that makes all of us the most priceless of all priceless treasures. But would we be so priceless if everyone on Earth could simply enjoy us forever? I don't think so. I do not think so at all. That would be meaningless. I'm the deputy of common sense. I dispense swift justice to those who aren't so swift. Do not be afraid. This is not the end, only a beginning. And if you take anything away from this video, let it be this. If you're ever afraid, if you're ever lost, if the world seems to turn dark, and you begin to lose hope, remember, you are not alone. You are never alone. You've got someone precious, and the truth is, those we cherish never truly leave us. I think that our loved ones still protect us, even in death. They live inside us, and if we should ever need them, all we need to do is listen. Go ahead, listen. Listen to the voice of your memories. Listen to the voices of those who are still here, whether physically or inside your mind. Center yourself. Find the person you treasure above all else. And remember just how much you care about that person. Listen to the voice of the most precious treasure that you possess. Wherever that person may be, they are never beyond your reach. Find that person and listen. That's all. Listen. Let their strength join with yours. Sometimes all you need is a little help. You don't need to carry that weight alone. One can tolerate a world of demons for the sake of an angel. And when that time comes, the stars will sing to us. The universe will sing us to our sleep. And remember, the story never really ends. Our chapter may be reaching its end, but not today. In the meantime, welcome to the future. Yes, this is indeed the future. You might be watching this in the present, but I started writing this script a week ago, and even the video itself is a part of the past. To you, it is the present, but to the current me, it is the past, and therefore that makes you a part of the future. Welcome to the future. Today is only the yesterday of tomorrow. Time is only a construct of the mind. You might think of the future as a thing we can travel to, and you would be absolutely right. We move into the future every single day. But what exactly does our future hold? I can't say for certain, but the possibilities are only limited by our imaginations. I've lived my life by forever defying the destiny that was planned out for me. Whatever else may be said, it has at least been a life worth living for, and perhaps even a life worth dying for. But not today. Well, don't just sit there, we're late. Time to go. There are worlds out there where the sky is burning, worlds where the seas are asleep and the rivers dream, people made of smoke and cities made of song. Somewhere there's danger, somewhere there's justice, and somewhere else there are those in desperate need of a little hope. Come on, music makers and dreamers of dreams. We've got a lot of work to do.
Doctor, explain, what is that?
The tracks of my tears.
Have you ever thought what
If
it's
you
like
had created a virus in your
in the fourth
laboratory,
dimension?
something contagious.
Every other business.
My life. My whole life is burned.
Everything we lost.
Could you then treat that child?
My hell.
Absolutely fantastic.
No.
You know, Stephen King said once, he said, salvation and damnation are the same thing. And I never knew what he meant.
Amelia.
It's not his fault. Maybe that's what happens if you touch the doctor. Even for a second.
I'm so sick of losing.
I think it's fair to say in the language of your age that I lived my dream. I owned the stage. Gave it 110%.
How many more? Just think how many have died in your name.
They're trying to help.
I was helping.
What, by clearing off?
Yes.
Yeah, well, clear off!
Save the tears for later, boyo.
He doesn't want the others to hear him crying. Please. You can clear off, get back in your lonely bloody TARDIS, and you don't come back.
Alone. I'm very, very scared.
I don't want you.
And I'm alone now. Alone.
I'm not just the Time Lord. I'm the last of the Time Lord.
The world is grey. And I am alone.
We're the only two left. There's no one else.
They're all gone now. My family, my friends, even that scar.
I am alone.
They'll never come back. Not now.
My planet's gone.
Do you remember my father's land back home?
What's he doing?
And they died. Took it all with them.
Gone forever.
I can do
Anything.
But they died, the Time Lords. All of them, they died.
I'm the last of the Time Lord.
The last of the Time Lords.
no more. There's nothing I can't do.
Nothing. I can do whatever the hell I like. You've read the stories. You know who I am. Gallifrey. Nobody.
No man has anything to say to me today!
And in all of that time, did you ever hear anything about anyone who stopped me? I warned you. You did this.
I did this! Do you hear me? I did this. This is my fault.
I don't care. Of his own, Doctor. You can't do this. You know you can't.
He never raised his voice. That was the worst thing. The fury of the time.
When people come to you and ask if trying to get to meet with the people I love.
Doctor, please.
Is it anyway a good idea?
You killed a man. You don't seem the type.
On my command!
It's okay. I went too far.
Then kill me! And do it! Do it! Just do it!
And that's your punishment.
Do it!
You knew.
I don't know what to do with all that pain. Hold it tight! My whole life is burning.
I have to be strong.
And you say this. No one else will ever have to live like this. No one else will ever have to feel this pain. Not on my watch.
You don't be a warrior. Promise me. Be a doctor.
counting the ways to where you are. I'm 22 for a moment, and she feels better than ever, and we're on fire, making our way back from Mars. 15, there's still time for you, time to buy and time to lose. 15, there's never a wish better than this, when you've only got 100 years to live. I'm 33 for a moment, I'm still a man, but you see I'm a they, a kid on the way, man, a family on my mind. I'm 45 for a moment, the sea is high and I'm heading into a crisis, chasing the years of my life. 15, there's still time for you, time to buy and time to lose yourself within a morning star. 15, I'm alright with you. 15, there's never a wish better than this, when you've only got 100 years to live. Half the time goes by and suddenly you're wise. Another blink of an eye, 67 is gone, the sun is getting high, we're moving on. I'm 99 for a moment, dying for just another moment, and I'm just dreaming, counting the ways to where you are. 15, there's still time for you. 22, I feel it too. 33, you're on your way. Every day's a new day, yeah. Never a wish better than this, when you've only got 100 years to live.